Hey, what is going on, everybody? It's Blue, and we're back with another video. With this particular video, I have been delaying it quite often, and what I've pretty much decided to do is I wanted to make some type of video where I kind of pick at my brain to give you guys just my ideas about a lot of different a lot of different details on the spec of Feral, so that you guys can be more educated yourself. Now, usually I make a guide video, but what I wanted to do is, instead of just telling you guys what it is and then going through the comments, which I don't mind doing the comments, but what I wanted to do is just kind of do my best to teach you at least kind of what I think about certain things, and maybe in the long run, it would just make you a better Feral player. Now, what I decided to do is, instead of making a long video that probably won't get watched, and a lot of these tips you won't see, we're going to break it up in a series of videos. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. This is the biggest question I get. So what we're going to be talking about is talents. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Have a great day. Peace.
Blue, you're my boy!
All right, everybody. So what we're going to be talking about is talents. We're going to be breaking down the talents. Now, what I want to do is, before we actually break down the talents and go over most of the talents and different scenarios for them and my ideas about them, I actually think the very most important thing to think about when you think about talents is your stats. Okay? Now, I want to go over the stats just briefly, but what I want you to do is, when I discuss each of these talents, some of them are not going to be related, I want you to think and tell yourself, which stat is this talent related to? Now, just a quick hint, everything on here is benefited by Critical Strike. Critical Strike is our best stat. Now, I want you to tell me, is this a verse stat? Is this a verse talent? Is this a mastery talent? Or is this a haste talent? Another trick, none of these are haste, don't worry too much about that. Maybe the primal. Alright, so Feral, of course, benefits by Critical Strike. Why? Well, first things first, easiest thing, Ferocious Bite does a lot of damage. Plus it being a critically hit is a lot more damage. So it's it's just very important there. And then we have our passive, Primal Fury. When you critically strike with an attack that generates a combo point, you gain an additional combo point. Now that's really good for us. If you think about Feral, most of the cooldowns, other than Convoke, other than our Covenant ability, is a DPS cooldown that actually helps us get through a rotation. So with Feral, getting through rotation faster is important, is increasing damage. Critical Strike does that for us. So Critical Strike is absolutely huge for us all the time. The next thing is Mastery. Mastery is our second best stat. It increases the damage done from our bleeds and our finishers. Really, really important. Haste usually is a dead stat for us. It's doing a little bit better because of Apex Predator, which you may be running. I've made suggestions in my video to get this trinket here. If you get this trinket, you will no longer need to run haste, but this is probably popping up in your sims. It's pretty important. What I would do is, to correct that, grab this trinket. And now versatility. Versatility does have its uses, especially in some of our abilities and talents, but this is just a straight damage increase to all of our abilities and decreased damage taken. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about what we're here for. So let's talk about the talents. So Feral has two talents on this one, Predator and Sabertooth. Now Sabertooth is the straight DPS increase for single target. It's just going to increase our bite damage. You guys saw earlier, this is one of the boss fights where bite is just doing so much damage. Now generally, if you're going in an AoE dungeon where the mobs are the priority, and when I mean mobs are the priority, they're the ones usually with the increased health, and then the bosses you just kind of nuke down. That's usually when you want to go Predator. This is going to make the cooldown of, or not the cooldown, but increase Tiger's Fury's uptime by a few seconds, and it's also going to reset when a mob dies with the bleed on, which should always be the case. They should always have bleeds on all your targets. So this one's going to just increase the uptime, the dungeon uptime of Tiger's Fury, which is a huge DPS cooldown. Now, with Apex Predator, you're probably wanting to go Sabretooth in most of your dungeons, even weeks where it's an ad week, just because the more ads you have, and if those ads have rip on them, you're going to get a lot of Apex procs, and it's going to give you the chance to prioritize a certain specific mob, or you tap target and you just start biting them all. So both of these have their uses. If you're not running Apex Predator, maybe Circle of Life in certain dungeons, this one's going to match very well with that. The level 25, these are, I would say, this is your choice. I usually never change Wild Charge. It's very useful, especially for doing specific mechanics and coming back to, let's say, a boss or a mob very quickly, or even dodging. You can dodge certain mechanics with Wild Charge as well as Skull Bash. Let's say there's something under you, you can tap target a mob that's a little further away from you, maybe a caster, and you can just avoid those mechanics by lunging or Skull Bashing to them. So this is pretty much my go-to. The level 30 is also pretty much a go-to for me for PvE content. Balance Affinity is very good, gives you that extra range, which can be useful, especially in AoE fights, as well as Typhoon. Typhoon is a very good CC ability. Just be very careful with this because it can mess up other individuals' damage, which you don't really want to do, so be mindful of that. Like if you have a DK, Hunters have their Covenant abilities where they lay something on the ground. There's just a lot of different classes that do that. I usually try to avoid this. If you have anything where mobs are against a wall, then that gives you a straight go-ahead to Typhoon. And Typhoon's usually great against multiple mobs that are casting. Okay, so 35. This is a very disputed talent row right now, I would say. For Mythic Plus, Mass Entanglement and Mighty Bash are my go-to, and I would say Mass Entanglement is also more of a niche situation for certain dungeons. So I actually only do it in Plaguefall because of this first boss, which has globlets that you have to avoid. That's probably the only time I would go Mass Entanglement, but you can make uses of it if you are in Discord with a tank and you want to give the tank a little bit of breathing room. You could possibly Stampeding Roar, Mass Entanglement. That would be really good, but that does require some type of communication. I would say Mighty Bash is, 90% the go-to. Mighty Bash is great. It gives Feral a lot of utility in dungeons that people don't expect, right? So like we talked about, we would Typhoon if we have multiple mobs casting. With Mighty Bash, you can actually avoid the Typhoon by Skull Bashing one, interrupting one, CCing the other with Mighty Bash, and it's got such a low cooldown, guys. You can CC a mob for 5 seconds every single mob pull. Very good. I think it's not used as very often, and definitely a favorite of mine, Mythic Plus. Now, the reason this is so disputed is because Heart of the Wild. Heart of the Wild, a lot of people see this as a DPS cooldown. What they end up doing is they go Heart of the Wild, and then for very big mob pulls, they say, hey, you know what, let's go Boomkin. Boomkin is the king of AoE. Let's go Boomkin, Heart of the Wild, to make those Boomkin spells hit harder, and then what we'll do is we'll Convoke, which gives us even more abilities we can use that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And what they are trying to fish for is they're fishing for a Starfall. Okay, that's the big AoE ability. And what I don't like about that is Convoke is such a very good ability for us, for Feral, and the strength of Convoke is in smaller packs. So what you're essentially doing by going Heart of the Wild, Convoking, and Boomkin form is you're wasting your cooldown on a bigger pack when you really already have a DPS cooldown for bigger packs, and that's Berserk, okay? Now, a lot of people still have the BFA mindset of Berserk when it was different, and they would only use Berserk on bosses. That was a legitimate thing. It just was not useful at all during mob pulls or any type of trash. That has changed, you guys, And Berserk is a DPS cooldown for bigger packs of AoE mobs. The reason why is because it gives you 2 extra combo points at the end of your Primal Wrath, and then you can just Primal Wrath back to back a lot faster. So that is a big DPS cooldown for us. Now, I will admit that maybe Heart of the Wild may possibly get you more damage, but you're really wasting Convoke. And you really want to use that Convoke on single target instead, because it just does so much single target damage. So that's kind of my dispute about that one, and it's got a really long cooldown. I don't think it's reliable, where I'd rather have the CC. And then honestly, I haven't tested the numbers to even see if going Boomy with Heart of the Wild is actually a DPS increase. I don't know if it is, and I would rather just stay Feral. Okay, going on to Talent Row 40. Soul of the Forest. Your finishing moves grant 5 energy per combo point spent and deal 5 increased damage. Okay, so this is going to increase the damage of our rips and AoE, which we already know is a lot, as well as our ferocious bites, which again we know is a lot. Savage Roar, unfortunately, I don't see a use for Savage Roar at all. The reason why is, although it may look good, this is going to decrease the amount of bites that we have. With Sabertooth being nerfed so that we can't infinitely stack a rip, we already juggle a few times of not being able to cast a Ferocious Bite because we need to cast a rip and maintain uptime on rip. Now this one just gives us a third ability that we need to press as a finisher and further decreases the amounts of bites we get. So as long as Ferocious Bite is doing so much damage, Savage Roar really doesn't have a use for us. Now Incarnation, King of the Jungle, this one still does have uses for us, you guys. This is what I would say is Feral's huge nuke button, okay? If you guys have been playing around with Feral, you know that Berserk, you do get starved during Berserk, and it's a DPS cooldown, but then again, it's kind of not sometimes because you're like, oh, well, I'm starved. I'm biting so much, which is great, but I really have to pool for the energy. Incarnation is going to reduce the amount of pooling, and you just go ham during Incarnation or Berserk, right? So this is a absolute nuke, but the thing is, overall, depending on how long the fight is, this is going to be a DPS loss. Any damage inside this window, which will last 30 seconds, is a DPS increase. As the fight increases beyond 30 seconds, you want to go Soul of the Forest. Now, so we may see a time in the future, if you are in a super good guild and you're just cleaning through some content and maybe you can nuke a boss in a minute or so, this is what you're going to want to do. This is going to be a parsing build still, okay? Now, other uses I can see for this is maybe Torghast. In Torghast, I really don't do a lot of massive pulls if you're doing solo content. If you're doing massive pulls, or I don't do massive pulls in Torghast, right? So I don't really use Berserk too often. I just save it for the last boss. And this would be great for Incarnation, actually. Now, just remember that you'd probably be getting reduced damage on your mob pulls, but if you're kind of doing those high-end Torghast where you're not really worried about the levels, but you're worried about that very end boss, this is the go-to here. Okay, that was a lot. Let's go on to the next one. On the 45 talent row, Sin of Blood, dead talent, don't really see any uses for. Brutal Slash, you're probably aware, this is our single target option. This is a really good damage increase for us in single targets. Gets us some nice cleave damage as well, especially since if you are going Blood Talons, you do need to use that swipe / Brutal Slash in single target, and this is great for that because it says, well, that AoE ability that you usually don't like to press but need to in single target, well, actually, it's a good ability now. So that's great. And then Primal Wrath being our AoE ability. Now, the reason I make this video is level 50 talents, okay? These are what I get the most disputed on, or the most comments on, and it's mostly because Moment of Clarity. We'll go over Moment of Clarity next, but I want to tell you about Blood Talons. Blood Talons, of course, has been changed. This one takes some mastering, you guys. You really need to get used to it, and I would suggest getting used to it because this is going to increase our bite damage, and as you guys see, for boss fights, our bite damage is doing a significant amount. Now, after looking at this graph of a dungeon boss, just think about what happens when we start scaling. We get better gear. Is bite going to increase? Yeah, it's going to start being more and more of a percentage value. This one probably got a lot of apex procs, by the way, because 56% is quite high. But still, as we start scaling, bite is going to increase in damage further. So Blood Talons is just going to be that scaling talent. But that doesn't mean, as of currently, these other two talent rows are competitive. And I would say, if you struggle with Blood Talons, go one of them. Feral Frenzy right now, it seems to be, according to Blood Mallet, simming quite well for single target, and it is a very forgiving talent as its counterpart. Blood Talons, as you guys know, can be quite difficult. But Feral Frenzy, it's pretty much a free bite, right? Gets you through that rotation immediately, gives you full combo points, gives you a little bit of a bleed as well, which goes with your potency trait, Taste of Blood, so that's a plus there. Now, let's talk about the big one, and the reason mostly that I'm making this video, Moment of Clarity. So it says Moment of Clarity now triggers 50% often. This is our passive that gives us free casts on Swipe, Shred, or Thrash. And can accumulate up to 2 charges and increases the damage of your next Shred, Swipe, and Thrash by 15%, and it also has benefit of increasing your energy. Alright, so what you need to think about, you guys, is where is Feral's damage? And a lot of you guys already know this. Where is Feral's damage? Let's talk about, like, if you were to explain to your friend, be like, oh, well, where's Feral's damage? Be like, well, I'll tell you right off the bat, we're kind of like a ramp-up class, right? And a lot of you guys know this, but when it comes to this talent, you don't think about this. So we're a ramp-up class, and why? Well, we're bleeds. We got to get our bleeds rolling and active, and then we're very stable. Now, with that said, where do these bleeds come from? Well, they come from the end of our rotation, right? So, because they come from the end of our rotation, Feral has 0 burst. And of course we have some cooldowns and whatnot, but just thinking about that, Feral, the design of Feral, it doesn't have burst, right? And you're probably used to this if you raid at all. We really don't have burst, okay? We're going to be at the bottom of the meters at the start of the poll when everybody's got their cooldowns, and this is without Convoke, by the way. This is kind of just the class in a nutshell. We're at the bottom of the meters, and then after everybody's DPS cooldown falls off, where's Feral? Well, we start inching our way top of the meters. Why? Because we have very consistent damage. And a lot of our damage comes from the very end of our combo points, our finishers. Now, in dungeons, is that good? Well, it can be good and it cannot. When can it not be good? Well, what if I'm attacking a group of mobs and they die instantly? I know, and Blue told me, that all of my damage is at the very end of my combo points. What if these mobs are dying in between my combo points? Well, that kind of sucks for you. Well, it doesn't, because we actually have a talent to assist us with that. We can move some of our damage that's in the back of our rotation more in the front of our rotation, okay? Blood Talons is increasing damage in the back, and Moment of Clarity is pushing some of that damage to be in the middle and the front, so it's front-loading our damage. How is it doing that? Well, it's taking some damage from Bite and Rips and moving it into our Swipes, our Shreds. There is no damage with Thrash, but it's front-loading our damage. So what I like to call this a burst talent. This is a burst talent for us, even though Feral really doesn't have much burst, but it is the only talent we have to front load our damage, okay? So this works very well in lower keys. It also works very well with Cat Eye Curio, which you guys have noticed I've been calling our burst legendary. And it also assists with bursting by giving us some additional energy. It's going to make it so, hey, when you go from pack to pack, you are going to have additional energy to get through your rotation. I don't want you swiping and losing energy while you're swiping. I want you to have enough upfront energy to just burst. Okay? So that's what moment of clarity is, you guys. And this is what blood talents is. Okay, so when you guys come to me and you're like, hey, I want to go moment of clarity. I mean, it seems good for me, but I don't know, that's what it is, you guys. That's the damage. If you want to do that, that is totally fine, and there are very appropriate situations for that. All right. So that is the end. I hope you guys kind of got some new thoughts about the talents. What I want to do right now is I want to quiz you and I want to see how well you did. And there's also some really good information from thinking and looking at your talents and thinking what stats are benefited. So hopefully we can go ahead and do that now, and you guys can come to a better realization about why I tell you to go certain talents and why certain talents can't be good, and how to better change your stats to assist what you're trying to do. All right? Predator, really no stats right there. This is just a nice DPS cooldown for a specific scenario that we talked about. Sabertooth increasing our bite damage and our rip damage by increasing the duration. Well, that's mastery, right? No, for utility, obviously nothing. Soul of the Force, what does it do? Our finisher, right? And it helps us get through our rotation faster. That's a DPS cooldown. But since this is a finisher, well, that's mastery. Incarnation, well, what is this doing? It's helping us get through rotation. Like I said, this incarnation's a little bit different from back incarnation, which is pretty much our current berserk right now, which increases our shreds, right? So this isn't a talent. Our normal isn't a talent. But just so you guys understand, the normal berserk, since it does increase our shred damage, what stat increases the shred damage? Well, versatility, right? That would just go berserk. This ability goes really well with versatility, because it's buffing our shreds, and we can further buff our shreds with versatility. Now, mastery doesn't affect our shreds at all, so that's kind of wouldn't be so beneficial there. But then, of course, there's dispute. Well, blue, it helps us get through rotation really quickly because shred now gives so many extra combo points. So now it's the water's a little bit muddy, right? Because this is berserk does both versatility and mastery. So incarnation, a little bit muddy right there. Like I said. Okay, brutal slash. Well, this is not a bleed at all, so this is versatility, right? Primal Wrath. Primal Wrath is mastery. Okay, blood talents. Well, blood talents is mastery, right? This is making our finishers do more damage. Now, here's something. This is the big one. And we'll talk about Feral Frenzy first, actually. So Feral Frenzy gives us a little bit of a bleed. I don't really do Feral Frenzy very much, you guys. But let me just read it. So Unleash a Furious Frenzy, clawing your target 5 times for 1k damage, physical damage, an additional 7k over a certain amount of seconds. So it looks like it's pretty similar of that upfront damage as well as the bleed damage. So the upfront damage would be versatility, the bleed damage would be mastery, but it looks like both values are pretty close. 5 times 1.2 versus 7, those values are actually pretty close. So that one's kind of a little bit mucky as well. That one's not a clear cut. But I would probably say mastery because we have the Taste of Blood, which is going to increase your bite damage. So now it's not just an equal amount of upfront, equal amount of bleed, but you got an equal amount of bleed plus the utility of Taste of Blood. So maybe mastery there. Okay, anyways. Moment of clarity. So what I was hoping for is you guys all realize, well, Blue, this one's easy. This one is definitely versatility, and you are correct. Why? This is front-loading your damage to abilities that are not affected by mastery. So if in the scenario you want to nuke adds immediately, let's say you're trying to parse on a fight. Which fight? I don't remember the I'm so bad with raid. Maybe it's this one. I think this is the one you heal. There are a lot of ads on Sun King Salvation. Sometimes those ads fall really quickly. So hey, if I'm trying to nuke down the ads as much as possible, pad those stats, well, I'm going to go Moment of Clarity. It's not enough. I want to get that top parse. Well, maybe I need to take some mastery out and put it in versatility. If at the end of your fight, you realize your swipe damage is doing a lot more than you thought it was, then maybe you should move some mastery into versatility to further increase those swipe damage. So that's what I kind of wanted to show you guys, and that's where my thoughts are. So when you guys look at it and you're saying like, hey, I'm going a mastery talent, a versatility talent, and then you're like, well, I want to go moment of clarity, and I'm just going to be like, well, you guys, a lot of your stuff that you're doing is crit mastery. So you are picking intentionally a talent to go moment of clarity, and if you're using it in the wrong scenario, then I'm going to say, look, keep going crit mastery all the way down your talents with blood talents. Okay. Anyways, guys, the video is super long. This is kind of some thoughts just out of my head. I really hope they're hopeful, or they were helpful. But that's it. Thanks so much, community. You guys are very supportive for me, and I really appreciate it. But that's it. Take it easy, everyone. Peace.